So good morning, everyone. Good morning to our online viewership. Good morning to all of those who may be in your workplaces, those at home, and even those on the way to work. We are running just a little bit behind, waiting for some candidates to arrive. So I would just ask that you still stay tuned. Please definitely get your coffee or do whatever you need to do to be comfortable, because we have a full day ahead of you with this candidates forum. Again, we are running just a few moments behind, and I would just ask that you stay tuned, and we'll be back momentarily. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Let me first say we do apologize for the late start. We were holding out for another candidate to arrive for the first debate. But it is time to move on. And so I will say good morning. My name is Jen Tompkins, and I am the president and CEO of the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League. Let me tell you, the Urban League's mission is to empower people of color to achieve economic self-reliance, parity, and civil rights. At the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League, we envision a community where people from a wide array of backgrounds and experiences contribute to and benefit from the alliance that is committed to action-oriented public policy, research, and principled advocacy. At the Urban League, we fight for you. We fight for you at the Urban League. And we are here at this 2022 Delaware Primary Candidate Forum. We are here to hear what the candidates have to say and for all of us to be informed. Let me first thank Dr. Kenneth Pettiford, who is the president of the National Pan-Hellenic Conference, and Kobe Owens in the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League Advocacy Department for putting together, for orchestrating today. Thank you to our additional partners, the National Pan-Hellenic Council, 100 Black Men of Delaware, National Coalition of Black Women, and the ACLU of Delaware Voting Rights Coalition. Last but not least, let me implore to all of you, let me encourage all of you. We need everyone to vote, everyone to vote. If you are registered to vote, please get someone else registered to vote. If you're not registered, make sure you are registered to vote and make sure we get out the vote. The vote is our voice. And I will leave you with this as we go into our first debate. I will leave you with this, with the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by all means, keep on moving. By all means, keep on moving to the polls and enjoy today. Now what I'm going to do is hand it over to our first moderator, Brandon Bryce.
Good morning, and thank you for an opportunity to hear from your next state auditor. Seconding Jennifer Tompkins, it's important to not only vote, but it's important to actually be informed about what you're voting for. And so I would like to be, on behalf of the 100 Black Men of Greater Delaware, to introduce and to welcome you to today's debate, first on the State Auditor of Accounts. Today, we're joined by Ms. Lydia York, who is a candidate for this seat. A very important seat, and one that is extremely important when we're talking about making sure that stewardship and responsibility is at the forefront. Ms. Lydia York, welcome to today's debate.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me today.
All right. Just a couple of rules that will happen today for the candidates. They will be allowed 90 seconds for an opening statement. The questions, they will have 90 seconds to respond and 60 seconds for a rebuttal. Potentially 30 seconds if needed. And their closing statements at the end, they will have 90 seconds to offer that. Ms. York will go into the first question. How would you explain the role of the auditor for the general public to understand?
The role of the state auditor here in Delaware, as prescribed by statute, is to review all the revenue that comes into the state and to assure the legislature that it's being spent in accordance with how they've determined it ought to be spent. The role of this office is to make sure that there are systems in place to actually assure that that's what's going on. And the state auditor is there as a political office so that in case there are political discussions around figuring all that out, there can be political heft to move that along.
All right. My next question will be for our second candidate, Ms. Kathleen McGinnis, the incumbent. Does the auditor's office have an annual audit scheduling plan, and is that plan available to the public? And if not, why?
Yes. What we've done in 2019 when I took over is we implemented the first ever risk-based audit plan. So we have an annual plan every year, and then we incorporate things called mandates, which are mandatory, and then we add tips from our hotline. So we look what rises to the top there. We include the code in which we have to do on certain schedules, and then we did a risk assessment survey, which now we do every year to all the state employees and let them give us input, and that helps decide that particular plan. Normally, it is in-house. You can FOIA it, but what we are looking to do this year is actually provide it to the public and let everyone know these are the agencies we are going to be auditing, or these are the entities.
All right, my next question for the challenger. What are your thoughts on allowing the public to be able to view the auditor's office annual audit plan, that same plan?
I think it's important that everyone have some confidence and there be a degree of transparency in the office so that people understand what it is we're looking for. But I would think that it's also important that they know that what's going on in the state auditors affects them. Is the program being implemented as directed? Is it actually getting the funds out to where it's supposed to go? And so I think making that public, people will have a heightened sense of awareness of what's going on, and then they perhaps will have a higher sense of participation.
Ms. McGinnis, let me ask you this. What are your priorities for this office if reelected?
I'd like to continue focusing on the base, the foundation. You know, I took over a broken office. My predecessor was in for 30 years. You can't fix 30 years in 3 years. However, we've done a remarkable job. Year one was transformation. When my predecessor started, there were about 60 auditors. When I started, there were about 7. The second year was information. Let people know there is an auditor doing outreach every day around the work schedule, and how relevant it is and it matters to them. And then it was collaboration. I worked together and put a team of 4 other states together. We did the first ever national audit, the first ever one, and we provided it to 11 other states that used that template. This was during COVID. We've done historic initiatives like the CARES Act Fund Tracker and the Fox Tracker and Project Gray Fox, where you can track how ARP monies are being spent in real time in your community. And I'm proud to say we have half the municipalities in the state voluntarily participating, along with all the school districts and all the state agencies. So things that we have done, we need to build on and make even more relevant and more better, because the taxpayers deserve to know, and they deserve that accountability and transparency, and make sure that we give them a fair deal for their money. Ms.
York, you have 30 seconds. Just a quick rebuttal to the same question. What are your priorities for this office if elected?
I think one of the basic priorities if elected would be to increase the robustness of the office itself. It takes more than 7 folks, and even with outside contractors, to get all the work done. The statute, I'm an attorney also by trade, but the statute's fairly specific about the work that ought to be done on at least a biennial basis, and I think it's important that the folks that are working there be supported in their work and to get the professional experiences that they need to do better in the work.
Ms. York, I'm going to stay with you. I have a follow-up question. What are your qualifications to hold this office as a newcomer?
As a newcomer, I feel like I'm still new to Delaware. I've been here about 20 years, but I have an undergraduate degree in accounting. I attended Florida A&M University. I'm a CPA, and I spent my first job working in public accounting. After that, after about 3 or 4 years of that, I actually attended the Wharton School, where I have a concentration in finance and in management. I've worked in banking, I've worked for a public utility. As an attorney, I've worked in a couple of different areas as well. I think I have the set of management skills, accounting understanding, as well as experience in managing other professionals to get this work done.
Ms. McGinnis, what are your thoughts on the state's use of taxpayer dollars as the auditor has that direct oversight?
As your state auditor with over 20 years of experience of auditing, budgeting, leading, I've had 2 small businesses. I sit on 6 national committees. I like to look at other states and what they're doing and collaborate with them and look at best practices, and we have benchmarks as well. But we are putting out a record number of engagements. Why? Because we've modernized the office. Since I took office, now we have 20-some people on site. We are going through these engagements in a record amount of time, and that makes sure that you get a fair deal, and that's good governance. Because in the code, it does talk about economy and efficiency of state dollars. I think it's very important that people recognize the background that I've provided and that I'm actually doing and collaborating with my team. That is historic, along with the initiatives and the amount of record number of engagements that are coming out. We have been following the code. We have been doing things doing more with less, if that makes sense, because we've migrated our software from Teammate to Teammate Plus. Now we track our time, we track our engagements, and we also have templates that we can use for the future. So we're able to do more with less because of my leadership skills, because of my background in small business.
Ms. McGinnis, I want to stay with you on this question. Title 29, Section 2906 states on the following: the Auditor of Accounts shall conduct post-audits of local school districts, tax funds budget, and expenditures annually. The result of the audit shall be submitted to the local board, the State Board of Education, the Office of Comptroller General, and the local libraries within said school district expenses incurred for such post audits herein authorized shall be part of that local school district. Do you agree or disagree, and if so, why?
We do the local school districts. We just started doing that engagement. We tried to earlier, but we had some pushback with some legal recourse back and forth of whether we were actually able to do so and was it covered under a larger engagement called the ACFR. But moving forward, we have started doing local school district. We also do construction projects annually, and we have a distribution list for everyone, General Assembly, Comptroller, Attorney General, Governor, and pertinent people. This is all provided to us by the actual audit team that's doing this, and we get it out to those folks. So I think it's important to get these engagements and audits out to the audiences that are actually close enough to the ones that are or even a part of the entity that is being audited. So I do agree with that. They are covered. Because they are to be covered, and sometimes when you have an auditor engagement, it'll speak to the code and say X amount should be, like for construction with the bond bill, is set aside for a particular engagement or audit. So I do agree with that, and the more people that read it, I welcome it. We post everything on our website. All of our engagements are on there for accountability and transparency purposes. So we want the public to be able to see what we're doing, and they need to know what's happening in their neighborhood and community with their monies.
Ms. York, my question for you, what concerns do you have from a fraud, waste, and abuse perspective, and how would you deter those actions from occurring if elected?
Waste, fraud, and abuse is a triptych that one typically hears in this area. And it's important to know that audit procedures will likely pick up the worst of it. Will they pick up every last bit of it? Probably not. But I think it's important that in the work program, the audit program is in fact geared to at least observing if it's detectable in a system. I like to think that it just doesn't happen as often as we think it does. But if it does, then a good audit program, a good system, and good people looking for it will be able to find it and address it. Where it goes after that is subject of some debate these days, in that there's some talk about bringing in an inspector general position. And to be clear, I don't think the statute that you quoted, Title 29, allows the auditor to actually go out or lay charges or bring charges, and the Department of Justice may or may not have the folks available at the time to deal with it in real time. But I think that waste, fraud, and abuse is something that a well-crafted audit program is going to observe if it's happening in sufficient quantity that it's material and affects the operation of that said agency.
Same question, Ms. McGinnis. You have 30 seconds as far as your perspective on waste, fraud, or abuse.
Well, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, we do incorporate our tips from the hotline. I developed the first year the fraud app, so folks who have one of these mobile devices, it's free and you don't have to upgrade it, but we have the fraud app at fraud.delaware.gov. We have seen a large uptick, maybe because of that, maybe because of our outreach with relevance, but in the last fiscal year, the previous fiscal year alone, we had over 1,000 communications. That was more than the 10 years previously combined. So we knew we were doing our job. That is just a piece of our audit plan. We look at fraud, waste, and abuse. We look at the hotline. We look at the risk assessment survey. And what rises to the top becomes a part of our annual audit plan. Obviously, there's a lot of it out there, and there's a lot of it that's being repeated. If you are not enforcing folks to make the changes that are necessary, you do have folks that have repeat findings year after year after year.
Ms. McGinnis, I'm going to stay with you on my next question. How many full audits and financial audits of school districts were completed last fiscal year, and are these audits available to the public in the local libraries? Realizing that now most information is available online, are all the full financial audits of school districts available on your office's website?
If you go to auditor.delaware.gov, you will be able to see a drop-down menu, and on there it will show you reports. And then when you click into that, you can see the previous fiscal years. We post everything there. We also post it on oversight.gov. I worked for a year behind the scenes to help update oversight.gov, which puts federal audits online. Proudly enough, we have been #1 in the country for uploading our audits. We worked for about a year behind the scenes with Inspector General. So yes, we put everything online, and you're right. Most people aren't coming in the office and asking for paper copies of anything anywhere. They are going online. That's where we can get it. We make it easy and accessible, and we also have a very large distribution list every time that we put out an engagement.
Ms. York, my question for you, what would you do to ensure that school districts are audited on an annual basis?
I think first of all, it's to comply with code. It says that you're supposed to do this on an annual basis. To make sure that we're doing this on an annual basis, I think it's important to increase the robustness of the staff at State Auditor and to get folks that are well-versed in that area to get the job done. I know that there is reliance in some cases on outside contractors, and I'm sure that they are perfectly capable of getting the work done as well. But I think that over time, to sort of fill this out to the four corners of what's prescribed in statute, we're going to have to look at increasing the robustness and the professionalism, not the professionalism, but increase the number of professionals that are available to do this work for the people of Delaware.
Ms. York, I'm going to stay on you also with this next question. The office has a little over 20 employees. What are your plans to increase the staffing level of the office?
Well, I think as a first matter, it's important to make sure that everybody there wants to be there and that as I like to say, we've got the right people on the bus. In terms of getting new folks in, I think the state of Delaware is based with several schools that have very strong accounting programs. And I think it's time that we make sure that they are aware that working for the state is a viable alternative to maybe working in the private sector to start with and as a great place to get the experience they may need to qualify to become CPAs themselves. I know that generally speaking in the private sector, folks that go into the big four public accounting firms or even the smaller firms, that very first job, they might not be there but 2-3 years, and that's okay. It's part of the way things work in the accounting profession. But I think it's important, given the fact that Delaware has so many strong programs, to make sure that they know that the state of Delaware, working for the State Auditor of Accounts, would be a good place for them to start their career.
Ms. McGinnis, how do you plan to work with the members of the General Assembly to inform them of findings that you find in your audits?
So a little bit about the office. We do have outside firms that we work with, but there's something that I think is more important, that auditing has changed dramatically. It's not the same audit that it was 10 years ago or audit shop 20 years ago. In fact, we need people who are strategic IT, and that's kind of driving the future. When we say audit, they're not just financial. We just won a huge case that we've been fighting for 2 years in court, where the judge sided with the auditor's office last week that the scope of authority is performance audits. That's the future. Performance audit. That's what's going on in the nation. Yes, you can spend money and show that with the financial audit, but performance audits are the future. We give all of our reports directly to the General Assembly. I give them a year-end review, and let them know the benchmarks and things that we have done. We've gone to to Joint Finance 3 years now asking for a couple more positions, and they have not been granted. So again, auditing's changed. We're doing more than less, and that's because of technology, and that's the future. So this has more, the audit shops of the future are going to be more performance-based, more data-oriented, and that is what we are bringing in now, looking to bring more of an IT side that can help work with all the engagements. For example, we do authorized positions, CTE, max student ratio, and tons of local school funds and school construction as well every year. So we're always auditing school districts.
Ms. York, same question with you. How would you plan to work with the members of the General Assembly?
Working with the General Assembly is working with 42 folks who are representing individual sections of the state. And they have their own diverse interests and their own diverse desires to come out of the auditor's office. I think it's just a matter of sitting down with both the political leadership and then with each individual representative, both in the House and in the Senate, to understand what their concerns are, how to address them, and how we can be responsive to any particular desires that they might have. I'd like to think that everyone in government is trying to do what's best for the folks, the people of Delaware, and I intend to be part of that great tradition.
Ms. York, Title 29, Section 2906 states that the Auditor of Accounts shall have sole responsibility for the arrangements under which the agency posts audits and shall be conducted for the selection of certified public accountants who shall make the post audits. No other state agency or member affiliation or employee thereof shall have any part in or responsibility for the selection of the certified public accountants, nor shall they make any arrangements, agreements, or contracts for the employment of the certified public accountants for the purpose of making agencies post audits. Will you or have you accepted campaign contributions from any CPA firm?
No.
Okay.
And no.
Okay. Same question for you, Ms. Guinness.
Actually, that code does state that there, but that is not true. My first year in office, we actually got legislated out of doing the sole selection, and we have several MOUs, which are called memorandums of understanding, because we contract with different entities, and we do not solely select. Let's take an example. University of Delaware. We audit financial statements, okay, every year, but we don't go and select. We jointly select. We might have a few people, they might provide a few people, they work together, they score, and then that is the agreement. So there's a few other entities as well. So that's, although it says it there, there's other places in the code that have negated that, and that has been upheld. So there are other agencies that simply are part of the selection process. That does not, and I want the folks to know, that doesn't mean they're actually doing the audit and they're driving or steering the information or what is getting audited. What that means is they are participating only in the selection, and it's usually equal on both sides, and the scoring, and then they have to go through the scoring and decide together who are their top, let's say top 2 or 3, providing the top 2 or 3. There are 2 or 3 people that actually bid on the actual engagement. So with that being said, I understand what you're saying with the code, but that is not actually how it is throughout the code.
Thank you. Ms. York, how do you believe exit conferences should be handled by the auditor's office?
Exit conferences are actually part of the audit process, where you sit down with the agency heads or you know, whoever the responsible people are, and review the audit findings with them and see what they can agree to, what they're not agreeing to. If there's a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding of what it is that's been found, that's part of the audit process. After that, it's still incumbent upon the auditor, the professional who's responsible for the report, to figure out exactly what should be in that report, what's going to go to the General Assembly, and then, of course, then be available to the people of Delaware. And it's important, you know, a very important thing to figure out what was in that prior year's management letter, so to speak, and what is it that they're making improvements on, and what are those recurring items that are important enough to be in the letter, but they don't seem to be thinking it's important enough to actually address year over year. But the exit conference is where we all sit down and figure out how can we do this better next time.
Ms. McGinnis, in your opinion, how should disputed findings in an audit be handled?
When we have different stages of an audit, and there's different types of engagement. We do inspections, agreed upon procedures, examinations, et cetera, and then under audit, different types of audit. We talked about financial and we talked about performance. Dispute, that's where at one of the processes, you might say, here's some findings. For example, we had findings. I believe it was a school district, and they came back to us and said, you know what? This person was off work. That's why they were on vacation. They didn't get that information to you. They provided it immediately. That finding gets removed. In 2020, I implemented and launched something called the follow-up program. So now when people have findings and recommendations, they are assigned a liaison. That liaison works with them for 6 months to address, resolve, or fix any of them. And I'm proud to tell you, last year, for example, we had a long-term care facility that had, it was so out of whack, and their books, they were just, we called them unauditable, and that's how they were reported. We worked with them for 6 months, and guess what? This year, out of the 15 long-term care facilities that we are releasing, we've already released 2 in the past couple days, they were one that had turned the corner, and with our help, now they come by with flying colors. So it does work. This follow-up program, working with the folks, letting them know how can we help you better serve either within your agency or your customer, depending on who's being audited.
All right. Ms. York, Delaware has been a recipient of federal relief funding. Do you believe this funding has been handled correctly? What do you agree with, and what would you do differently?
If we're talking about the tax funds that became available due to the pandemic, that was a whole lot of money that came into a lot of government entities pretty much all at once, and not a lot of instructions with exactly how to spend it. In terms of figuring out what one ought to do, it's important to sort of, I would guess, collaborate with a lot of the other agencies that receive these funds, and I'm confident that at some point the federal government will give us a clue exactly how they want that reviewed as well. But I think that, as I said, that was a lot of money that came in pretty much all at once. It got spent more or less all at once. I think it's important that we get the word out and agree upon those procedures, get the work done, and that's, to be mindful that that's on top of the already, the burden, I shouldn't say the burden, the task that the state auditor already has, getting that stuff done, and then making sure that we can all make good account of what was done with that money, because it was important and it came at a very important time for Americans and Delawareans.
Ms. McGinnis, what are your thoughts about how to make Delaware more fiscally responsible while meeting the needs of its citizens?
Well, I can tell you there is a report that usually comes out every 3 years, and they rate the different states for accountability and transparency. And years ago, we had a B, and now we're down to a D. We should be moving the other way. So we developed something during the COVID relief called the CARES Act Fund Tracker, and every week we would update it. As the state would update their data, we would pull that and post it on our site. And then with the second round of money, the American Rescue Plan Act and the ARP funds, we created Project Gray Fox, which tracks in real time, and we have the Fox Tracker. So as folks spend, we can show that to you. I believe people want accountability and transparency. I believe they want someone who will stand up and not give up, like we did for 2 years in court for Delawareans, so they could see how their money is being spent. That's what they want. They want to, the first 6 months of 2021, we identified over $111 million of efficiency savings, government overspend, and potential revenue just in the first 6 months. And as of today, we're close to $1 billion with that same 3 things that I've just identified for you. So there is a real sense of we are spending money, but how are we spending money? Is it appropriate? Is it the most efficient for the services that we are providing? And that's where performance auditing comes in, and that's where accountability and transparency that we continue to provide from my auditor's office daily.
All right, final question, and then we'll go into the closing statements. Final question, we'll start with Ms. York. Is there any situation that might prevent either of you from serving your term if elected?
I can't think of anything right offhand. The requirements for this office are fairly simple. You have to be old enough and you have to be resident in Delaware. That's what's in our state code, that's what's in the Constitution. And beyond that, there's not a lot of qualifications. But I think it's important that voters think about some of the things that they might want to see in someone holding this office. And that they're free, of course, to vote that way.
Ms. McGinnis.
I think you have to win the primary and then the general election, and that would be something that would hold you back from serving. I knock on doors every day after work, and I hit all the different counties, and the people, the Delawareans, are telling me that they want me to serve. Overwhelmingly, I take a pulse every day. If I had doors slammed in my face, it would be a different story. But I am hearing people care about real issues, kitchen table issues, the price of gas, the cost of inflation or formula. Can I get formula? Gosh, meat is expensive. How come childcare is so much? These are the things that people care about, not the nonsense and the political theater that's going on. So I am working hard daily to continue to fight for Delawareans. Depending on how some things roll out, I think my journey might be a little longer. We don't know than expected. But right now, serving on 6 national committees and having over 20 years of auditing and budgeting and serving the public and actually getting results and showing value to the taxpayers, I think that is something that is paramount.
So now we move into the final closing statements. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to give their final closings. We'll start with Ms. York. You have 90 seconds.
Thank you. The folks at Delaware, the folks that wrote the Delaware Constitution, had something in mind when they made this office political, and I probably alluded to that at the beginning. But it's important to understand that it doesn't have to necessarily be a political office, but the vision that they had here was that there would be an office of professional auditors assuring the people of Delaware that their revenue and their spending is happening as it's been directed by the state legislature. I think it's important that the state auditor live into that function. I think it's important that the folks who are doing that work actually work for the state. I think it's important that the folks in Delaware have access to the reports that are being produced, and the reports that are being produced in accordance not just with the Title 29 that you've heard referenced here, but with the other places in the code where the state auditor is involved with what's going on, where they're supposed to be in consultation with other folks. I think it's important that someone be able to do that. I think that I bring that mix of passion about the work, the ability to communicate, and the desire to get the work done.
Ms. McGinnis.
I think the informed voters have watched me work tirelessly, put out a record number of engagements that have never been done, aside from the initiatives like the historic projects like Gray Fox or internal controls, which was just highlighted in the annual report for GEAR, which is Government Efficiency and Accountability put out by the governor. So the follow-up program, the risk assessment surveys, we provide this. We try and get it as many ways to the public as possible and let the public reach us, not only by phone or by email, but that's why the fraud app was developed. But people want results. They want someone with motivation, passion, tenacity, and who have a spine, who are willing to stand up for what matters. For example, the court ruling on August 10th, where we are now allowed to do performance audits. The scope of authority was defined. We fought several agencies. This is a game changer for the office to have that performance audits are an audit, which we have been doing all along, as had others. But I believe people want results, and I have a proven track record of so. I'd like to collaborate with other states and look at best practices and continue to modernize the office with a focus on technology and provide that to the public. It's all about accountability and transparency.
And that concludes this debate. As we always say in the Urban League, once an Urban Leaguer, always an Urban Leaguer. Remember, the most important thing that we ask you to do is to vote. Good night and Godspeed.
Hi, I'm Dr. Keith Pettiford, President of the National Pan-Hellenic Council of Castle County Delaware. Thank you for watching our very first debate. Our next debate starts at 12 o'clock noon, so please tune in and also let family, friends, and community members know so that they can tune in as well. Thank you. Welcome back. Thank you for watching our very first debate, and now we're ready to move on to our second candidate forum for today. I'm now going to pass it over to our next moderator, Dr. Doris Griffin.
Hello, I'm Dr. Doris Griffin, and I serve as the third vice president of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women. It's an honor to be with you for this wonderful debate opportunity. Hopefully your ears are open and you are ready to receive. We have with us this afternoon State Representative Nnamdi Chukwocha, who will be sharing with us, and also City Councilwoman Shanae Nicole Darby from District Number 2. Good afternoon to both of you, and we are ready to receive from you. We'd like to begin first with an opening statement from both of you, please. And then we want to allow you 90 seconds for those opening statements, and then we're going to jump right into the questions. All right?
Yes, ma'am.
State Rep, we're ready for you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. In terms of opening statements, I am, again, State Representative Nnamdi Chukwocha. I am a lifelong Wilmingtonian, a proud licensed master social worker with over 30 years experience. I have worked hands-on in the community since I was 13 years old at the Walnut Street YMCA, created nonprofits, been a part of boards and task force appointed by governors for energy and education and early childhood education. I've been civically involved since I was a teen in civic associations. I was the proud past president of the 1st District Neighborhood Planning Council before going on to becoming the city council person for a few terms on city council, where I felt I was a very effective member on city council. I was promoted by my peers to be the president pro tem and also the vice chair of the finance committee, which is a big deal on Wilmington City Council, before becoming the state representative. And since being the state representative, I've been very committed and diligent to our community, the growth and development. I truly feel that is my duty and obligation as the state representative to bring our state resources into our districts. I'm proud of the economic and social development that we've had. I focus heavily on our schools, on our seniors, and I look forward to earning the respect and the vote of our constituents to continue this fight in Dover. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you for having me today. I am Councilwoman Shanae Darby, a proud public servant. I'm also a single mother, a child behavioral therapist, a member of Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated, and a paralegal serving in the Army National Guard. My story is the story of so many throughout our city. In 2007, as I was completing my senior year of high school, I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. People wrote me off as just another statistic. They said that I would never be able to go to college and my life was over, but I was determined to prove them wrong. I enrolled at Temple University. I was pregnant during my first semester, had my daughter on Christmas Eve, and returned to school for next semester in January. Even with the support of my family, I had to work multiple jobs and receive social services benefits. I lived in Compton apartments, low-income housing on the east side of Wilmington, and I remember many late nights writing papers with my daughter on my lap in that apartment. While I was able to earn my degrees, I experienced firsthand how our broken system continues to put up barriers to better the life that we were promised. I experienced the Wilmington we all experience, a tight job market no matter how well educated you are, the lack of well-resourced daycares and schools, the lack of affordable housing that pushes so many of our residents to properties owned by slumlords. And I know that our community deserves better. Today, you're going to see my passion and my heart. You're going to see me as a proud Black woman, a mother, a Wilmingtonian, and a Delawarean. You're going to see your next state representative. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for those opening statements. Now we are ready to begin with our question and answer period. And each of you will have an opportunity to respond to the questions as they are presented. You will have 90 seconds, and then you will have an opportunity to rebut what is stated in the amount of 60 seconds. Are we clear?
Yes.
Great. All right. Our first is going to be a general question for both of you, and we'll start with State Rep, please. What are the most important challenges facing our state, and how do you propose to address them?
The most important challenges to me for facing our district and state are to me, one, education, two, economic and community development, and three, I would say, gun and community violence. In terms of education, for Wilmington, our district in particular, we have a 4-district model system that has proven to be a failure for the past 40 years. Every 10 years or so, we come up with a new plan, but we never implement change. Our children are the lowest performing within the state, and it has just been repeated over and over again. So we truly need to implement change. What I've done as a state representative, along with my colleague, Senator Lockman, we created the Reading Consortium for Educational Equity, which has brought an additional $20 million into our school. In terms of economic and community development, we have a new $23 million library coming to the 1st District. We also are bringing the Downtown Development District, which created and enhanced, which changed our old Market Street Mall into what it is today, with being a lively business center. We're going to do the same thing on our end of Market Street, starting at the Brandywine River and going through to the city's edge, bringing investment into our communities. And lastly, in terms of gun violence, I led the Safety and Justice Subcommittee, and we have an array of legislation, some which has passed and many more bills which are set to come, which will address gun and community violence to make our communities safer.
Thank you so very much. City Councilwoman, please.
Yes, the top 3 priorities for our district and for our state, I would definitely say housing, criminal justice reform, and gun violence. So when we're looking at housing, it's really important that this past legislative session, we had some great legislation, right to counsel, that was put up to protect renters in our city and throughout our state. And it was voted no by our current state representative. So I am for housing legislation that would protect renters. Secondly, criminal justice reform. I'm looking at Leobor. That was a legislation that was killed, this legislation, and that we are looking at that again once I become state representative to talk about police accountability where there's police violence in our communities and it has not been addressed and police officers are not being held accountable for inappropriate behaviors. And thirdly, gun violence. So we really need to look at the underlying causes of crime in our community. Our district just had one of the last few shootings where a young girl was shot in the head between 2 gangs shooting back and forth at each other. So gun violence is something that we need to take care of to understand why it's happening, looking at our education system, our healthcare system, looking at all of those factors that play a role in criminal and why people commit crimes.
Thank you. Yes.
Just on one point, it was mentioned that I voted against the housing tenants bill, and I just wanted to clarify my position. I'm definitely in support as a community-based social worker. I am in support of the renters and the renters' rights. I did support that effort. I asked for an amendment to the bill that would protect small business owners who may own 1 or 2 properties so that they wouldn't be treated as if they were unscrupulous landlords. Many of those landlords are a part of our communities. They pay civic association fees. They attend our community meetings. So to treat them unfairly would be unjust. And if we lose them as being property owners and renters in our community, then we're likely to have more unscrupulous landlords come in who won't be vetting, who will not vet their tenants before they move in, and who aren't as vested in our community. So my intent was to have an amendment on the bill that would speak for my business owners in my community. Unfortunately, that wasn't accepted, so the bill did not go forward, but I am in support of renters' rights.
Thank you very much, both of you. Let's engage our viewers by hearing your thoughts on environmental justice. The question is, how do you propose to get Delaware to be more reliant on renewable energy in the near future? Question again? Oh, I'm sorry.
You want to go first?
Yeah, I'm sorry. We can start with City Councilwoman Darby.
Yeah, so in Delaware, and looking at like environmental injustice issues, I think it's important that we really focus on communities of color and low wealth communities because they're hit first and worst by sea level rises, flooding, contaminated water, and polluted air. We see this when we look at our South Bridge community. We're about to hit the 1-year anniversary of Ida hurricane flooding, where the city's East Side, Riverside, and 11th Street bridges were impacted. And Wilmington must have a voice when we're talking about renewable energy, when we're talking about pollution, when we're talking about water, because there's a lot of environmental injustice and inequities that our city is facing. But as a state legislator, I would support things like what we have already, is the Clean Water Act, to make sure Wilmington neighborhoods are prioritized so we can create a comprehensive plan that will address the environmental issues. And I also believe, as we're creating that plan, we need to look at how government responds to natural disasters and provide better responses to services to help people who are displaced and experiencing hardships, especially Black and brown and poor communities. In Wilmington, we see this continuous and legacy of racialized disaster relief that is grounded in anti-Blackness and classism, and this must change. I'm also in support of legislation similar to what State Representative Medina Wilson Anton proposed, which is a legislation to establish a constitutional mandate that clean water and clean air is a right for all citizens, which was actually defeated in committee. And I'm also in support of State Representative Larry Lambert's Justice 40 initiative that would give money to disadvantaged communities around that issue.
Thank you both for providing us with, did you have a rebuttal?
No, I didn't go yet.
Oh, I apologize.
So in terms of, definitely was a proud supporter of the Clean Water Act. And in terms of environmental justice, is definitely a key concern to me, something that's very important. When you think about the First District community, many of our residential communities were once brownfields, were once areas in which there was contamination from previous businesses and industries that were all throughout our district. If you look at our community, we have factories, we have auto places in our community. We have the garbage dump, Cherry Island, right behind us. We have all of these institutions that, all of these entities that are doing harm to our community. So when we think about environmental justice, it's really about having a plan forward. I was a proud member of the Sustainable Energy and Utilities Commission for the state, and bringing renewable energies into our school. Was proud to be able to support places in the First District, like the Wilmington Senior Center, where they were able to receive loans and grants, grant opportunities that enabled them to provide upkeep to their senior living facilities through state finance programs that enable them to update the senior living facilities. Also working with many of our schools so that they can have our schools be more energy efficient, so that we aren't wasting resources on energy when we could be using those resources in the classroom to educate our children.
All right. Thank you both very much. I'm sure both of you would agree that education is the cornerstone to seeing our young people succeed. So the next two questions will involve education. There's a mental health crisis in children and teens that was exacerbated by the pandemic. Mm-hmm. How do you propose that this be addressed? Yes.
In terms of mental health, as a licensed master social worker, being school-based, mental health are truly, this is the concern. This is my life's work. I've been a school and community-based social worker for the majority of my career. Mental health focus, and also understanding that the needs of our schools. When we think about education, we passed House Bill 100, House Bill 300, which provided, and which I was a proud sponsor, co-sponsor of, and which provided additional mental health services and for elementary and now middle schools. But the key important thing to those bills, which I'm proud to say that I advocated for and was a voice for our communities, is not only do we now have additional social workers, but it took a voice like mine, a voice who is grounded in our schools every day, working with our counselors, working with our guidance counselors and therapists to realize the need. It's one thing to create these positions, but then it's another thing to have those positions inside of our city schools filled. And so I created a policy working with DOE and the governor's office and DSEA to where not only are these positions coming into our schools, but now our city schools and schools of high need, Title I schools will be the first priority placement. So it's one thing to have the positions, which I'm glad our state did supply a unit for, but the second thing is about how they're going to be implemented. So we definitely need to do that. It's definitely a priority. It's needed. Our teachers can't teach and our children can't learn without the additional mental health supports inside of their schools. It's so needed.
Thank you so much. City Councilwoman.
Yes, as a child behavioral therapist, I work directly with students, young people in our community on a school base and community base. So I think it's really important that we're finding funding to be able to expand the type of therapy or social work that is happening. We need to be out in these streets as social workers, as therapists, going to the homes, meeting the people where they are, and that's what I do in my role, and I have been doing that for a while. And mental health is something key and important to me because that is stopping a lot of children from being able to get the education that they need, from teachers being able to teach, for staff members and professionals being able to provide the services that they need to provide for students, because they're experiencing a lot of trauma in their neighborhoods, a lot of violence, a lot of social supports that are home that they're not getting. So mental health is key and important for our students and for them to thrive in their education. So we need school-based, and we need to do some community-based, and we need to integrate those two so that we have people who are working with the family holistically, because it's not just about working with the student, it's also about working with the parents, and that's the type of work that I do in regards to addressing mental health in education. And for our children, it's a holistic approach.
Thank you. Thank you both. In that same vein, it has been acknowledged that there was a significant learning loss for children in some of our most vulnerable schools and communities as a result of the pandemic. Now, how do you propose to address this achievement gap for our students? And we will begin with City Council Person Darby.
Yeah, so I think that currently we need to invest in our education system and address the inequities that exist, because these things we're talking about, achievement gap for COVID, it existed before COVID, right? It's just now that COVID kind of just opened the door for us to see things in a very different way. So I think we need to still look at how we're funding our schools, right? Equitable funding to build strong schools, healing-centered, community schools. We need to look at how we're treating our teachers, what they're getting paid, class size ratio. How are we dealing with behaviors in a restorative manner? Looking specifically at Wilmington, I think this is a good time for us to talk about how many districts we have, how our children are being broken up and having to go hours out to get to school. Even talking about an equitable and well-funded Wilmington High School. Those things were needed before COVID, and COVID just kind of highlighted and sped up that process that we need to start taking action on education for our school. So first, as a parent, I understand that gap, right? I had children home with me during the pandemic, right? And I'm seeing that with my children. You know, I was a substitute teacher in Delaware. I witnessed overworked and stressed teachers, so I can imagine what it's like now. I taught as a high school teacher in Philadelphia, and I remember they had a gap, right? I was trying to teach pre-algebra to ninth graders, and I had to teach basic addition and subtraction before I even got to pre-algebra. So I know firsthand the inequities that are happening, and COVID just exacerbated that issue.
Thank you, State Rep.
I would say, first and foremost, as has been noted, that these gaps existed well before COVID. Our children and our recent scores, which were just released, only intensified the need, and it really just pulled back the curtain and shows the need for our students with additional services. The way in which I believe we begin to address it is first and foremost through our funding formula. Currently, right now, Delaware is one of only a handful of states that still uses a unit count system, which is where we count students as units, which pay for teachers. The equity is off balance because you never take into account student need. So we need to have a student-based, need-based funding formula that bases the funding for schools based off the needs of the students, not based off of the teachers that they generate. So we have to change that funding formula. And secondly, another thing, I was proud to sponsor a bill which brought, normally right now what we do in Delaware is we start on September 30th, and we have one count for the rest of the school year. And if schools experience growth, then they have to use the local share instead of state money to meet the needs. I created a bill, and it was passed, and it created a second unit count. So now we will have a second unit count, so schools that experience growth can get additional state money to meet the students' needs. But we do need before care and after care programs, and there are federal grants like full service community school grants through the federal government that our districts can apply for. that can assist them.
Thank you very much. We're going to stay right with you as we now take a look at reproductive rights. And the question for reproductive rights is, what are your thoughts about making birth control easy to access?
I think when we think about reproductive rights, I mean, just imagining where we are today, I don't think anyone could have imagined that we would be here and with losing Roe versus Wade and all of the protections that it provided. And looking forward, when we think about providing education and access to reproductive health services to our children and our teens and young adults in our communities, it's 100% necessary. It's mandatory. If we don't, then what we're doing is allowing our communities to be controlled. We're allowing our communities continue to be led in a different direction where they aren't protected, they aren't receiving the services and support that they need. So I'm 100% in support of providing services and supports inside of our schools that will provide the necessary supports to our youth and teens, whether it's through our health centers in the schools or rather through community-based agencies. But I would 100% support that, and it is definitely a need that I see every day. It's a need that you understand not only on the female side, but also from the stance of from young men being able to understand the reality and responsibility of fatherhood and unplanned fatherhood and what that means and the justification of continuing this continued cycle of having men who aren't prepared to be fathers and that continuing progress and deterioration it creates in our communities.
All right. Yes, please.
Yes. So I have been one of the leading voices throughout the state of Delaware about reproductive rights. I started a nonprofit called Black Mothers in Power. We are focused on reproductive justice and rights throughout the state of Delaware. So I am 100% in support of making sure that birth control, anyone has access to birth control. And that goes to recently Roe versus Wade. On that conversation, that I am in full support of making sure that we protect our abortion rights. Recently, Black Mothers in Power, we worked with the Attorney General with some other legislators on getting an abortion hotline. We're working on a first state abortion fund so that people are able to get funding for abortions or for wages or for childcare so that they have access to that. And I've also been the leading voice around reproductive rights around Black maternal health care. And I worked a lot with State Representative Melissa Minor Brown on how to contribute to reducing the disparities that exist for Black women in the reproductive stage. And when I looked at those legislations, I realized that our current state rep, he did not co-sponsor any of those bills. And actually, when I was attending the committee meetings, he was not present. And that the first district was missing a voice along the lines of reproductive rights and reproductive justice when it was so important to have conversations about Black women, about maternal care, when only 20% of the committee meetings were hit. That is unfair, and that important conversation about birth control, abortion, and Black maternal health care hits to my heart. That is what I talk about and what I'm a leader on in the state of Delaware.
Thank you. We are going to stay right with you, City Councilwoman, and we're going to take a look at the fiscal front. The question regarding our fiscal standing is, Delaware has been a recipient of federal relief funding. Do you believe this funding has been handled correctly? What do you agree with, and what would you do differently?
Yes. So do I think that the federal funding has been handled correctly? I believe that it hasn't. And I say that because a lot of times we talk about what we don't have funding for. We don't have funding for our kids' school. We don't have funding for after-school programs. We don't have funding for Medicaid for all. And I think it's really important that we look at having a more progressive tax system in the state of Delaware. And I think that would help with getting more funding for the state of Delaware, because currently right now, when you have a progressive tax system, that means corporations and wealthy people must contribute more taxes taxes, right? So currently right now, if I make $60,000 or if I make $6 million, you're paying the same amount of taxes, right? So I think some of the solutions would be looking at a progressive tax system so that we're getting the proper funding and everyone is paying into a system so that we have funding for our schools, so that we have funding for our healthcare, so that we have funding for the things that we need for our community, funding to end gun violence, funding to be able to have community-based strategies on the street to deal with some of the social issues and problems that we have in our community.
Thank you. Your turn.
I believe that there are two ways in which the federal funding was utilized, some very effectively and some very ineffectively. I believe some of the effective ways in which it was implemented, when you think about the Hope Center, which provided shelter for homeless individuals, and some of the motel and stipend supports that the federal funding helped to secure for individuals, some of the downstate housing support programs that benefited, as well as some of our local housing organizations in creating housing opportunities, especially first-time home buying opportunities for individuals in our community. Some of the downside of the funding is that I believe we weren't very creative in our approach to implementing and truly working with members of our community, be they nonprofits or be they community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and really looking to expand and tie this funding to pre-established, already in place, already producing organizations such as the CDCs in our community, Central Baptist and other CDCs that are truly already doing the work. If we could have tied some of this funding into that initiative, when we think about our inner city, we have the Wilmington Community Advisory Council that was created from the CDC report to address community violence. If we had put some of that funding into those agencies in that effort, then we could have had a greater impact. But we missed the boat on those areas, and that's where I say we fell short.
All right. Thank you very much, State Representative. We're going to shift now to law enforcement. And the question is, what is your stance on the current status of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights? What reforms do you support?
I think is where we are currently. I mean, there was definitely a grave conversation that has started, and it needs to continue. We, meaning the Delaware Legislative Black Caucus, we created the African American Task Force, and a subgroup of that was the Law Enforcement Accountability Task Force. And one of the charges for that subcommittee was LEABOR was one of their agenda items. And in that subcommittee, they had individuals from community-based organizations, many of our advocacy groups, as well as law enforcement or attorney general, and so many other groups were a part of that group, really thinking holistically and about how we could approach LEABOR. It is a very tough topic. I believe they had initial recommendations come from that subcommittee, but they were never truly allowed to finish their work. And before, I guess, it became an issue with how are we moving forward within that group. It kind of got left hanging. I really wish, and I believe that our African American Task Force, as our work continues through our work with Delaware State University, that will be one of the first issues that I believe that the next phase of the African American Task Force in partnership with Delaware State University will pursue and move forward. I think that there are definitely needs for LEABOR changes in there. It needs to be a conversation. And again, I think the African American Task Force in partnership with Delaware State University moving forward will be the entity I believe that can handle it.
Thank you. All right. Yes, City Council.
Yeah, so with LEABOR, I'm in support of LEABOR reform, actually repealing it like they did in Maryland is what I'm really in support of, but we're in Delaware. So with the LEABOR reform legislation that happened in the last session, it was actually community advocates stopped supporting it because it was actually killed because police unions and people who support police or get donations for campaigns from police were advocating for the bill to be watered down. So we need to really reimagine policing in Delaware. We had people who have been shot and killed by police officers, Lamont Moses, Jeremy McDowell, Yaheem Harris, and Brandon Roberts, and most recently, a 37-year-old man with a disability had his arm broken by a police officer. So when I, as a state representative, I support necessary changes for better policing. So that's Leah Board reform. And the current state rate did not co-sponsor the Leah Board reform legislation. And so I don't know why we're protecting police officers who abuse their power over people they are supposed to protect. We need community review boards. We need community response teams so that we're responding to people with mental health crisis. We're responding to people with alcohol and drug issues. Where police officers who are not trained, they do not need to respond to that. As a man with intellectual disabilities had his arm broken because the police officer is not trained to work with people with those type of issues. So we really need to look at that, and there's a long overdue change that needs to happen for our policing.
Thank you. We're going to stay right with you, and we're going to ease into the topic regarding eminent domain. And the question is, how will you protect residents who are impacted by it?
Yes. So protecting residents from eminent domain, there's no protection that needs to happen as of right now. The community killed that bill. So our current representative pushed the bill despite opposition from the community and housing advocates. So eminent domain exists already, but for public use. If we need a new hospital, if we need something that is good for the public, but not for private development. This legislation came from my very own mayor, Mike Przicki, from his office and was passed down to State Representative Bud Friel and then given to the current state representative. And if you check campaign donations, you'll see donations to from those very people who support this legislation given to our state representative. This legislation will not do any good for the community. So the biggest things we can do to address vacant properties is to keep people in their homes in the first place. So eminent domain should not be a tool to be used for gentrification for our communities and then selling them to private developers. We need to look at inclusionary zoning. We need to increase more money in the budget to increase homeowner repair programs, home ownership, finding ways for people to buy these vacant properties so that they're able to turn them into homes, so that we're not looking at ways to take people's properties. That is not the answer for dealing with vacant homes. Eminent domain is not a tool for that, and it's dangerous to Black and brown communities. So I continue and want to say that because I'm going to continue to fight to make sure that eminent domain does not pass in its current form when it's coming from an administration that's about big development.
Thank you very much. State Representative, would like to hear from you, please.
Two things on eminent domain. First and foremost, the legislation that I sponsored was developed in partnership, and it worked in partnership with our city administration. Many members from city council, they weren't attending the leadership meetings, so they weren't involved. So city council's voice wasn't there, unfortunately. But the legislation itself wasn't, there's this misnomer that about eminent domain, that it's the bad way, what eminent domain is used in a harmful way, because many people have that view of eminent domain being that what happened down the riverfront. The legislation that I sponsored was the exact opposite. It was tied to community development. As a community-based social worker, I would never do anything to hurt my community. This was to help my community. Some of you may remember in 2016, there were two homeless individuals who were killed inside of a long-standing vacant property on the corner of 5th and Jefferson. The city tried to go after the property owner. They couldn't get in touch with them. Ultimately, the Attorney General's office, everybody was involved. The city ended up using eminent domain to take control of those properties and knock them down because of a safety risk. If my legislation, and now when you drive by there today, all you see is 2 green spaces with a fence around it. If my legislation as proposed had been in place, then instead of having 2 green spaces there, you would have 4 houses for home development, because that community has a community plan geared toward home ownership and first-time home buyers. So that's what my economic development push was for, about community development, adding a tool to eminent domain that ties it to community development and has nothing to do with taking homes, but a development.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll stay right with you. We need to talk about housing in Delaware. Affordable housing is a crisis in our state. Crisis. What plans do you have to address this crisis?
It's a crisis, and not just in Wilmington, but truly throughout our state, to have affordable access to ability to own a home or even rent a home in some areas. So for us to really have an investment, we need not just state investment, but also federal investment. The city of Wilmington, I believe, owns 1,500 or so properties that they control with continued investment, where you mentioned some of the funding from the ARPA funds. Those investments could have been geared toward home ownership programs. I know we're using some on the east side, but toward home ownership programs where many of those same vacants could have been turned around and brought back online to become revenue generating as part of our community-based development, bringing families back into our community. That's the way we begin to create home ownership opportunities, looking at areas of development. In the first district in particular, since 2008, when the housing market crashed, we started a housing project there on McMullen Square. And ever since 2008, when the market sank, those same places already have been primed, already scoped out, designed for home ownership in our community, have sat vacant ever since then. So we need investment at the city, county, and state level and federal resources to help areas like ours in that community to begin to finish those projects so that we can have more housing opportunities for individuals in the first district.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so addressing affordable housing, I think one of the first things would be inclusionary zoning. So inclusionary zoning would be that if you are a developer getting subsidy and you're developing, like you see Wilmington's riverfront area, a certain percentage of your units have to be affordable housing. So what's happening in Wilmington now is that development is happening and people who live there cannot even afford it, so they're being displaced or moved out, which is in terms gentrification. So we also need to look at finding more money to increase home ownership. We need to look at more money to provide assistance to renters. So that's like supporting things like right to counsel, right to representation, so that we can keep renters in their homes and give them assistance during the eviction process. So those things are protecting renters, looking at ways to increase home ownership, looking at how developers come into our city, come into our state and develop, and making sure that we have those things in place to make sure homes are affordable. I once was a renter, and I know when I came to Wilmington and I was looking for a home to rent, either it was not affordable or it was not livable, right? So I come from firsthand experience of understanding the housing issues that we faced in our state and specifically here in the city of Wilmington.
Thank you very much. We're going to stay with you. Voting rights, voting rights, voting rights. Currently, there is a list of disqualifying felonies that permanently prohibit a person from registering to vote in Delaware. Murder or manslaughter, felony constituting sexual offense, bribery, improper influence, or abuse of office. Do you support reinstating voting rights for all people previously involved with the criminal justice system? If so, why? If not, why not? Start with.
So, yeah, absolutely, 100% support it. Disenfranchisement is a piece of legislation we've started. It's in draft form. It was one of the key recommendations from my Safety and Justice African American Task Force. That was one of the key recommendations that came from our work over the past 2 years. Delaware is definitely behind, and that's an area that we have to. So if you have, once you come out of incarceration, your voting rights, our goal is to restore your voting rights immediately. That should be one of the first things that we do, along with your reintegration back into the community. We talk about giving individuals a second chance. That second chance starts there with me feeling and realizing that I have an opportunity to engage and participate in the process within my community. And that starts with that very singular but very powerful act of voting. So we definitely want to restore voting rights for those who've been disenfranchised. That's a bill, as I stated, that's already been under works, not only with myself, but also Senator Gay. She has had started it, and we meshed our efforts together, but it's definitely a bill that is already under work. And as I noted, it was one of the key recommendations from the African American Safety and Justice Subcommittee.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
City Councilperson?
Yes, I'm also in support of making sure that voting rights are restored from anyone who was released from prison. I think that it's important that with the day that they come home, that they have that second chance to become integrated into the community. I also wanted to take it a step further. When I served on the redistricting committee for city council, I realized that people who were incarcerated should have voting rights too. I passed a piece of legislation on a city council level that will actually end prison mandering, where prisoners or people who are incarcerated are not counted by where they are incarcerated, but counted by their last known address to decrease prison mandering and gerrymandering in the redistricting process. I also sent the resolution up to the General Assembly to ask for incarcerated people to have the right to vote. So it's bigger than that. If we're going to count them in our census, and we're going to count them in our numbers, we need to make sure that they have a right to vote incarcerated and when they get home.
Thank you very much. We'll stay with you, and I want to make sure that you have enough time, both of you, to do your closing statements. So I'm going to jump to the last section of questions that we have. Racial justice. Let's look at racial justice. How do you propose to combat systemic racism, wealth inequity, unequal access to education, and racial and ethnic inequality? Can you be very specific in how you will increase the representation on boards and commissions, cabinet positions, advisory groups, and other decision-making appointed positions? Let us begin with City Councilperson.
Yes, I am all for diversifying our boards, our committees, and racial justice, economic justice for our community, for our state legislator. I think that we have done a great job in trying to address some of these things around the lines of racial justice and economic justice in the past legislative session with the $15 minimum wage, reform on fees and fines, and I'm also looking to expand that by looking at community workforce agreements, local hire, developer labor agreements, and ensuring also, as we talk about minimum wage, that is actual livable wage. So I think all of those play into the conversation when we talk about racial justice, and ways to do that, I think, is by the legislation that we propose, and also making sure that the committees that we hold, the boards, the commissions, they are diversified not just by race, by sex, by religion, by language barriers. All of those things we should look at when we're talking about racial justice, we're talking about economic justice and those things.
Thank you. State
And
Representative.
I would say, to begin the statement, I think as a state, really as a nation, we need to be honest with ourselves about recognizing racism. We need to truly understand the impact that racism and the systemic racist system that supported racism, that continued it, that still exists, that we need to be honest about its impact from everything from our schools to our prisons, healthcare, economic development. And when we begin to have those conversations, not only in the halls of the General Assembly, but also meeting with our department heads and department secretaries and all the way down to our direct service staff for our state who are truly implementing services, whether they be our police officers or our EMTs or our crossing guards, and begin to understand the impacts that racism has on each of our lives every single day. And when we begin to have those honest conversations about what it means, rather you want to call it the Delaware way, and where we don't speak about certain things, but we truly begin to have well-needed, intentional conversations about the harm that's been done to our communities and how we begin to restore that. It begins, as you noted, with having individuals who are placed on certain boards and commissions, not just picking as, token this person, I know this person, and this person ends up being on 10 boards. We need individuals who truly represent our community to be given those appointments.
Thank you so very much. We are almost at the end, and I want to give you the opportunity to provide your closing statements. I want to ask you to stick to 60 seconds each to provide your closing statement so that we have enough time for both. And I will go back to you, State Representative, so that we can hear from you first.
Thank you. I thank you for being here this evening, and I would say in my closing statement, I think this is really about truly a history of service. There's a clear distinction between my level of service, my level of service in the community as a community-based social worker, licensed for 30 years, leading nonprofits, leading school-based organizations, my work leading civic associations, leading our neighborhood planning councils, my proven leadership on city council as president pro tem, and my proven commitment inside of our state chambers to truly make a difference. Having a voice, someone that has the passion and conviction to make a difference. There's one thing about being, people say I'm an advocate and we pump our angry fists into the empty air, but truly understanding legislation and truly breaking down systems, that's my life of every day, organizational and community change. That's my life as a social worker, and that's my life as an elected official, and I look forward to gaining your support on September the 13th.
Thank you so much. City Councilwoman, we're ready?
Yes. So I did not expect to be before you guys today as a candidate for the State House, but after I came home from the military training this past June, I was receiving all sorts of calls about people frustrated, right? They wanted a leader. They wanted someone who was going to put people before politics and Wilmington before special interests. And they felt like the current representative was failing to prioritize the needs of the community, looking at things like police reform and housing rights. And if there's one thing I learned throughout my life is that you can never choose when you'll be called to serve, but you can choose how you answer that call to service. And I know we face a lot of big challenges in Wilmington, but the idea of having to solve those big challenges doesn't dismay me. It actually gets me up in the morning, and I get up around 4 a.m. But in the State House, I would bring the leadership I brought to City Council on some of the most pressing issues. And I want to close out on this. So our current state representative looked at a room full of his own constituents who were against his bill and told them to run against them if they did not support it. Well, here I am, and I'm an unbought, unbossed champion for the community. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. We don't have time
Yeah, I mean,
for...
I just want to state that was a lie. I never made that statement, never. She wasn't in the room. I was in the room. I know what I said. It was actually a council person who said, Linda Gray stood up and said, if you don't like what the councilman's doing, you run against him. I didn't make this statement. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, State Rep. Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to thank everyone for their participation today. I think the courageousness of the candidates has been outstanding. Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Doris Griffin, and I want to thank you for joining us for this opportunity.
Welcome to the 13th District Delaware House of Representatives debate. My name's John Reynolds. I'm from the ACLU of Delaware and the Clean Slate Delaware campaign. It's a privilege to be here today moderating this debate between Ms. Deshauna Neal and Mr. Carlucci Coelho. For today's debate, just a few ground rules to start. Each candidate is going to have 90 seconds to deliver an opening statement, starting with Ms. Neal. We will then proceed in through a series of questions. I will ask one of you to respond initially. You will have 90 seconds for your response, and then the other candidate will have 60 seconds to respond on that issue as well. And at the closing of our debate, we will then have 90 seconds for each of you to present a closing statement. So to get us started, Ms. Neal, if you could start us with your opening statement.
Good afternoon, everyone, or morning. Not sure where we're at right now. I want to thank the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League for having me here. I'm pretty excited. So a little bit about me. I am an advocate. I am a born and raised Wilmingtonian. I have 4 amazing children, 2 which are transgender. And it is because of those 2 I have helped Delaware with many policies to make sure that they are included in the conversation, that they are included as people. And from doing that from DC and then coming back to my home state, I also realized there's more to that. There are more people, the intersections of people, that are not being heard and are being ignored. I am an intersectional person. I am openly queer, I am disabled, and I'm a Black woman. I am running because people need to be empowered again. Their voices need to be heard in Dover. And therefore, that is my plan, to take the voices of the ignored and underrepresented and take them to Dover with me, because I can't do this alone. I'm going to do it for them. I've been doing this a long time, so I think I got it from here, but I can't wait to bring the people with me.
Mr. Coelho, your opening statement.
Hello. So first I would like to start by saying thank you to the Metropolitan Urban League for inviting me to be here. I'm here because I want to work together. I want to prioritize public safety. I want to create quality schools. I want to really work really hard in my district to create an economic opportunity for everyone. Myself as a realtor, I'm passionate about the people of the 13th district. I believe in freedom of education and opportunity to the American dream because myself, I am a part of the American dream as I was a little kid in Europe, in Portugal, where I come from, to America and wish to be part of America. So I am a legal immigrant that came to America to become an American citizen, which my dream is to serve the people of the United States of America, especially at this moment, the people of the state of Delaware, the people of District 13. I'm very grateful for the opportunity that Delaware has given it to me. We must protect Delaware and our children and our future, and that means every form of belief. I will stand and peacefully fight to help achieve their goals and make a better place to live in District 13. I believe that if we come together as a community and as a group, we'll achieve greater things into the District 13 of Delaware.
Mr. Coelho, thank you. And thank you both for your opening statements. So we're going to move some questions. And to start, we're going to start relatively generally. I'd like Ms. Neal, Candidate Neal, if you could start with what are the most important challenges facing our state, and how do you propose to address them?
That's a great question. As I said, I was born and raised here, so I've been able to see a lot of the issues that face our state. The fact that we are in an economic crisis, seeing businesses that started off for generations now closing, seeing kids get left behind in our education system. There's so many things that are going wrong, and yet we can do better. As a state and as a representative, I hope I am, I want to show the generations after me that Delaware is a great place to call home. I remember as a child, you know, people are like, where are you from? And I'm like, I don't want to say Delaware, so it's Philadelphia, you know? And it wasn't because I hated my state, but it was because, one, no one knew where we were, and two, we didn't have a lot to show for it. I want to make sure that when we call ourselves the first state, that is because we are first in equity, inclusion, and diversity for all Delaware residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Coelho, your response.
So I do understand that the state of Delaware is going through some issues, which many states around the United States of America this time, and I wanted to focus a little bit more on District 13. So I believe in District 13, a big issue, just like is happening across America, is division. People are divided. With that comes the division of education, the division in criminality, the division of who you are and who you should marry and who you should be, and all that has to be controlled in a form that achieves better positivity in the future for our state. And that's my goal, is actually to represent and be the voice for those who cannot get heard, and they need to be able to speak out to the state when we go to Dover.
All right. So for our next question, we're going to move to the issue of reproductive rights. And Candidate Coelho, I'd like to start with you on this question. What constitutional protections do you support for reproductive rights in our state?
Could you break down the reproductive rights? What you mean by
Yes.
that?
So in the news recently, there's been a lot about reproductive rights with the Supreme Court's decision in overturning Roe v. Wade and limiting access to abortion. And so I'm curious and like to hear what constitutional protections for reproductive rights what stances you have, what you support, and what your ideas are in this space.
Okay, thank you for the question, for explaining to me. Okay, so I have to start, first of all, to say thank you, God, for me actually to be here today, because He has closed many doors for me to be here. Believing in God and believing in a universe that is being brought me in front of you, I believe in life. So I am not in favor of abortion. I've never been in favor of abortion, but also I'm a person that I believe if you're going to put a stop sign to somebody, it should be a yield sign to come to that stop sign. So do I believe that someone may have the issue that they need to have an abortion? Yeah, maybe that's possible, and that woman should be protected by, but at the same time, we need to come to the conclusion, why is that abortion being made? Because in my opinion, the word abortion is very soft, because to me it's more about murdering someone inside of you. And that's how I feel. But at the same time, I believe the woman has her voice to speak out, and the state also is responsible to hear that woman and give her choices, and not only give her choices, give choices if she wants to keep that baby, how to take care of that child until he's at least 18 years old. And I'm not talking about just the welfare system. I'm talking about other programs that should come in place to support those who want to support life to stay here, not to leave us.
Candidate Neal, your response.
So I'm standing here as a person who have had to have 2 abortions at 18 and 19 while I was in college because I knew I wasn't ready and I knew I wouldn't be able to give the best life to a child at that time. I was in Pennsylvania, and while there was access, it wasn't covered by my insurance, which at the time was my mom's, and really it probably was, but I was too scared to share that information or have it on her insurance. So I paid out of pocket, and it was a lot of money. Not just women get abortions. We have to also talk about trans men and non-binary people. People with uteruses need abortions. It is a human right, and it is a health care right. I plan as a representative to not only ensure that the bills and policies we've already put in place continue to keep us safe from abortion in Delaware, but also make sure Medicaid can cover abortions for those in need.
Thank you both for your responses. Next, we're going to transition slightly to talk about housing. And candidate Neil, I'd like to start with you. So, affordable housing is a crisis in Delaware. What plans do you have to address this current crisis?
Absolutely. I don't know if we've seen recently, but the Wilmington Housing Authority reopened their list for vouchers for 2, 3, and 4 bedroom homes. It was supposed to stay open from the 9th to the 12th of August. It had to be closed officially by the 11th because they were overwhelmed with the responses of people needing homes. We have a crisis in the homeless population, and not just people with mental health disorders, but those who lost their homes during Ida and during COVID. As a legislator, I want to see that we work together, the communities work together, and the funding goes to communities and invest in them. We have a lot of vacant properties that can be turned into affordable homes, but because of profit over people, these things are not happening. So I suggest we actually remember that people make our salaries, they are our voters, and they are our friends and neighbors. And we need to do something such as letting them get hold of those houses so that they can continue to thrive. There is nothing worse than knowing whether or not your home is going to be taken from you or if it's going to fall apart. And as a child, that's the most scariest thing possible. Why are we doing this to people when we have everything? My grandparents' house is still vacant because they want to sell it. They want to make profit. But it could be given to people in that community. And that's what we need to do.
Thank you for that answer. Mr. Coelho.
Well, myself being a realtor in the state of Delaware, I surely can understand very much the need of housing. I show homes where 70 people shows up for 1 apartment for rent. That shows you the need out there of housing. Not only housing, but housing for people with disabilities, senior people. Not a lot of places to be able to accommodate someone with disabilities or somebody that is older because everything has steps and 2 floors and there's nothing like flat floors. Also, we are noticing that a lot of people takes advantage of the people by keep on charging over and over fees to check on their credit for these apartments and these houses when automatically they already know they have 50 and 60 people they saw their house and they're taking their money over and over, and in the end they have no home because we have such high numbers for level of credit that really who's out there after, especially after COVID, they can afford 3 times the amount of someone's rent, of the amount of the rent, or have score credits about 640 or higher.
Thank you both for those responses. We're actually going to stay with housing, and specifically talking about tenants. So, candidate Coelho, could you talk to me about what your position is on the Tenants' Right to Counsel bill that was introduced during the last legislative session, and what type of rights you would support for tenants faced with an eviction?
Well, I come to the conclusion that, like as I said, as a realtor being in this state, I noticed the necessity of the people trying to be able to find a home or an apartment because they're being evicted from homes because they weren't able to afford the rent. So I support the fact that landlords need to be protected also because a lot of landlords, they invested their little monies also to become landlords. Not every landlord is a rich person that just bought properties. I know plenty of small businesses, they invest in small properties so they can eventually rent them. Well, they've been losing money from not getting those rents. We also have people that are really in major need of getting the help to support those rents to go back to them. But actually, what's happening a lot is a lot of people also are taking advantage of the system, and because the system is not implemented correctly, we're having a problem with people taking advantage, and the other ones are not taking advantage and suffering by the ones that are taking advantage of the system.
So
I would like to see a little reform on the help of the landlord and the owner of the property, and also like to see a little help more in the fact of the tenant that needs to get their home.
And can I just ask a follow-up question?
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of more pointedly, do you support the right for tenants to have counsel when facing eviction?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Candidate Neal, response.
So as you can probably see, my opponent is not here, but he was one of the ones who voted against the tenant right to counsel policy, which died in committee. One thing I want to say about that is we really got to stop with the backdoor stuff, because the public deserves to know what's going on in our government. Secondly, we saw the Adams Street eviction crisis. That was not something that we could turn a blind eye to. That was an obvious slumlord getting money from the most disadvantaged and not doing anything to ensure they had stable living. I support the tenant right to counsel. Landlords can afford their counsels, but when you're poor, you cannot always find a lawyer. And I believe it is a constitutional right for counsel if you are going to trial. That should include tenants. We should not have children out on the streets right before school wondering where they're going to stay.
So we're going to continue to stay with the topic of housing and move to the more kind of specific topic of eminent domain. So, Candidate Neal, what is your position on eminent domain, and how will you protect residents who are affected by its use?
So I'm going to say it like it is. Eminent domain is a fancy way of saying gentrification. And here's the thing. We have seen for centuries thriving Black and brown communities be torn apart by rich white corporations and communities because they don't like that they have the same quality of life as they have. That is what this is. I have a nonprofit in which I feed families in need and the homeless monthly. And one of the hardest things was trying to follow them because they kept getting pushed out of their own communities due to eminent domain. Why are we just trying to build Delaware to be this fancy place where young white couples can live when we have an amazing, diverse culture and community sitting right here? You can't have a jazz festival, which, as we know, jazz started with the Black community in our center city of Rodney Square, while at the same time pushing those people who live in that area into worse and worse situations. You can't do the same thing. You have to care about the people and not give developers houses. Furthermore, legislation I would like to push, if private or public developers want to come in, they, one, have to give funding to the people, and they have to keep one store alive, one grocery store alive.
Thank you, Candidate Neal. Candidate Coelho, your stance on eminent domain.
Well, I have a little bit of different point, different visions about the subject. It is, I believe that it's not a racial subject. This is my opinion. I believe that is more a financial issue that comes into place, and that comes from lack of education. The people cannot get better jobs and to get a better living and to move to a better neighborhood with better houses and newer houses. And also the fact that those houses where they are now, that also should have been, being fixed and upgraded. The people in charge of those districts are not doing their job to keep up with those landlords and telling them that the law says that you need to take care of those people. So by the time the we don't see the law being enforced into those landlords or owners of those properties taking good care of those houses how they're supposed to do, the neighborhood starts to decrease in value, and other corporations and other people will come in and try to get there for less money and try to, yes, push people out. But that means anyone. I know neighborhoods where white, brown, black live in, and they're being pushed out just because for the simple fact that the neighborhood is run down. But who run down the neighborhood is actually the people that lives there, or is the people that own those properties? Because a lot of those neighborhoods are not even self-owned. They're owned by someone else.
So for our next topic, we're going to move to environmental justice. And Candidate Coelho, I'd like to hear from you first about what initiatives you will propose to improve air and water quality for the communities in your district and across Delaware that have been most negatively impacted.
Thank you for the question. I actually been involved talking to a lot of the community about the fact of the water. And a lot of people complains to me about they have sickness and issues happening because of the water. So I'm being honest with you. I am new running for a campaign. I'm new running for many subjects that I'm learning about them. But I definitely can tell you the water is one of my #1 issues here because most people cannot afford to go buy bottled water every day. And they need their water. Whatever it is to make coffee, tea, bathe their child. When they're taking a shower, the water is going down. Even that, just that alone, I'm hearing a lot of problems of families together as a home and as a community showing up with sickness and disease that they complains about the water. It is or not, I'm not sure because I didn't investigate it, but I believe that if I would win into my district, there'll be one of the facts that I would like to put in place is to get a full investigation of what's going on with the water.
Candidate Neal.
So I grew up with boil advisories. And they, as a child, you don't understand it, but as it's explained to you, you have to boil the water because there's some contamination and we can't drink it regularly. I didn't understand how someone could mess up water, and I'm still at the place of like, why are we doing this? My opponent actually voted against the green amendment that Representative Medina put in place. In fact, he was quoted saying, I think Delaware's just fine. And yet here we are being ranked in the high single digits as having the most cancer rates, especially lung cancer. And that comes from pollution. If you think about living in the city, the houses are all cramped together, the row homes are all together, and you have lots of traffic. So that means smog, carcinogens just floating into the air. The kids are developing more asthma and more allergies. If I get into office, I plan on supporting Medina's bill, the Clean Water Bill, and the climate bill put forth by the Sierra Club. This way, we can finally say we are working towards a cleaner and safer Delaware for everyone.
So I'd actually like to stay in this area just to hear a little bit more about each of your stances on environmental justice issues and just give you, starting with Candidate Neal, are there any other environmental justice initiatives that you would propose if elected or support?
Yes. So in office, I would plan on proposing that we have higher regulations and more fines and restrictions on corporate companies that enjoy dumping their chemicals in our water. We've been letting them go this long, and it's obviously having a very negative impact on all of our health. I am a person with disabilities. I have an autoimmune disorder, and a lot of that does come from the fact that our environment here in Delaware is not the best it could be. As I tell my kids, when we know better, we do better. And we're adults. We kind of made this mess. We already know better. The data is there. The stories are there. But why aren't we doing better? I would want to see corporations who purposely disregard when we say you will not be putting your chemicals in this wastewater. You need to find a more substantial, cleaner way to rid your chemicals. If they go and violate that, they get fined. If they continue to violate that, then there's going to have to be some kind of court hearing or some kind of committee hearing to find out why do you not listen to rules. You're smart enough, you got the money, figure it out. So instead of putting money over our health, we need to have Delaware become a cleaner state. We could be the first state to do it. So we need to do better.
Thank you. Candidate Coelho, any other comments you have on environmental justice?
I guess I'm on the same topic as people needs to be held responsible for what they're doing to the water. I've been in Delaware for 3 decades. All I hear about it myself, I do not drink the water from the spigot because as a realtor, I go to neighborhoods that are much more expensive, and there's plenty of literature there to educate those people not to drink the water if you have cancer, HIV, other problems. And then when I go to a neighborhood that is not so valuable, per se, in money for real estate, is no information for those people, and they're the same type of people. So I always got confused about that, including myself. I don't live in a very rich neighborhood. How come I'm not being told, as I have a mom with surviving breast cancer and a brother also with a form of cancer? I ask myself, how come I didn't got their information in my mailbox also to tell me that my mom should not be drinking their water, or my brother? So with that, I believe that people should be responsible every time they come and dump things into our water. Corporations and business, they need to be held responsible for that. And it doesn't mean if you're a Democrat or Republican or independent, everyone should want to have clean water for everyone.
Thank you both. We're going to move, because it's election season, we couldn't have a debate without talking in some way about voting rights as well. So for the next question, I'm interested in hearing from each of you, starting with you, Candidate Coelho, about Delaware's current list of disqualifying felonies that permanently prohibit a person from registering to vote. Do you support reinstating voting rights for all people previously involved with the legal system? Why or why not?
Well, I don't agree that everybody should vote. And the reason why starts, for example, with me. I'm an immigrant, came from another country to become an American citizen. I waited for many years to be able to vote, the right to vote. I not only admire, but I appreciate and see the strength what a vote means in America, to vote. I believe that the American citizens, that they're showing every day by working hard and trying to show their voice through the vote, should be heard. And I believe the people that they lost by mistakes they have done in their life, which I could have chosen the same mistakes, or you or anybody else, they should be punished by the fact that their voice cannot be heard at that moment because you didn't care about the rest of your community. You didn't care even about your own self, to respect your own self, not to go commit such type of crime or other issues in there that you lost the right to vote. Now, you should have a hearing, and you should be able to, they should be able to hear you why you feel like you really should vote. If you feel they're hard, you need to vote. But I do not agree that people, especially criminals, they should have the right to vote. And that's how I stand.
Candidate Neal.
I am 100% sure my great-great-great-grandfather wasn't allowed to vote. Not because he was a criminal, but because he was black. I'm sure my great-great-grandfather couldn't vote because of Jim Crow laws. I come from a long line of advocates who fought to have the rights just to be. Our criminal system and our prison system here in Delaware, majority of them are black and brown, and they are in there not just for violent offenses, but for offenses that have not even seen a judge, but because they couldn't pay the bail. Everyone has a voice, regardless of what you've done. You have a voice. If you've gone through the system, if you've paid that price, if you have made your amends, and you are now out as a citizen once again into our lovely little state, tiny little state, you have a voice. There's nothing worse than telling a person, well, because you did something bad, everything about you is bad, and you don't deserve anything. If they have to abide by the laws once they're out, including paying taxes, then they should have the right to vote for what's happening to them and the people around them. Everyone has a voice. Every voice matters.
Thank you both for your responses. We're going to stick with the legal system for this next question. And I'm going to start with you, candidate Neal. What reforms to our legal system would you propose to reduce the negative impact on our communities and the often disparate outcomes for the poor and people of color?
First and foremost, I would repeal Leobor. The fact that we are giving so much power to a system that was built on racism means it's so weird to me. We should be investing in our communities. Our poor communities are not getting the funding. They're living in food deserts. They're tired. They're hungry. Their education and supplies do not exist, and they're trying the best they can. And again, when you can be arrested because you smell like weed, and then if you can't pay the bail, you're stuck in jail, you've got a kid at home who is wondering what's going to happen to me. Our communities are crying and have been crying out, especially the poor ones, our black and brown ones. Do you see me? We need better policing. We need more mental health and medical support. We need to ensure that there is never another food desert in any poor community. And we need to remember that they are there. I go into lots of communities. I sit on a ton of committees that deal with making sure communities are heard. And the fact that we don't, that is where I want to fix.
Thank you. So, candidate Coelho.
Well, it is a very important question that makes you think, how could you help? And it goes back to education. It goes back into having centers in places where people can come, not because they have to have a degree in college, but because they have a gift of plumbing, a gift of carpentry, a gift of cutting hair. Whatever that is going to get them pride to have a job and to achieve money to help their family and to help their community and get involved. That's more important in my eyes of seeing people becoming happy and pride of saying, I worked, I got paid. So when I go around my District 13, is no place to be hold for that. Not only that, I have found that 24% of my community is Spanish, and is also no place there that they can go for help for themselves to grow into work skills or even into English, to be able to then be able to talk to INS and have things explained to them and to move up. So I think in my perspective, I understand the policing needs better training, especially in my district, does not have a very good reputation for many years. I know that myself. They're more worried about people getting 5 miles over the speed limit than actually getting into the neighborhoods and helping those who are in need and talk to them and see if they can help them. So that's a major issue for me about education.
Can I
Yes.
respond to that?
Yes.
Okay. There is nothing more than wanting to work hard. But could you imagine just waking up hungry and your only meal is at school? When you wake up and there's just an outline of where bullets flew, you're not thinking about how am I going to get money. You're thinking about how am I going to survive the day. To say that you just go out there and get a job, that's not real. That's not a realistic dream. People want to work, but it's almost impossible if you don't have transportation, if you don't have support, if your schools aren't providing enough. My children get lunches that have mold in them, so then they go hungry until they get home and pray that there is food. Luckily, my children are lucky, but not a lot are. People want to work, but just saying get a job, we've heard that. I'm on assistance. I've heard that. It is not as easy as you think.
So give me 1 second. I'd like to. We've talked a fair amount about education right here.
Yes.
But I want to have us transition there in a second. But there's one other topic that came up that I want to make sure that we give you both a chance to be clear about your stances on. And so that is the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, or LEOBOR. I would just like a quicker response, if possible, starting with you, candidate Coelho, about what your stance is on LEOBOR and what reforms, if any, would you support?
Well, I would like to go back, if you don't mind, to the conversation that the
Sure,
candidate here
if
was
you would
having.
like to
And I'm
use
sorry,
a few-
I really
a few
would
of
like
your
to,
seconds.
because I would like to just tell a little bit about myself again. So when I came to America, due to different difficulties, I ended up in probably one of the most poor neighborhoods in Philadelphia, North Darien Street. And I met many, many people that were so poor, we lived between houses that were closed down for crack. So I know the struggle of America. I know the struggle of people not having money to eat or food in the tables, like people selling their food stamps to people. They're supposed to go to their babies and it's for drugs. I'm aware of that. But also, I'm aware there is strength inside of you that if you want to do something out of yourself and you want to move up and you want to get a job, I have seen, by living in America, thousands of people that were able to succeed, come from the poverty and become great, successful stories. So, yes, we need more places that can help you get a job and a good skill, but I don't think that we should focus that because of my race, I've been subjected to where I am.
So,
And going back to the
yes.
police,
Well, if we can make it
really
quick.
I believe, because I am a person that believes in well, first of all, I would just want to say that I was very in shock when I realized how short period of time it takes to become a cop. That is very short period. I believe it should be a longer education into any police officer is going to be in the street dealing with the community. That's my most important part to me, is that it's not enough training.
And so beyond the training, specifically about the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, I think we're all interested in hearing your stance on the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights and any reforms you would support. If I could get a quick answer, then candidate Neal, I'm going to move to you to see if you wanted to expand on your earlier response.
I would like for Ms. O'Neill to go first, and because as I said, I am new debating, I am new running for a district, and I would like to hear other people's opinions, just for me to feel if mine is also a good one, if you don't mind.
Okay, well, I will provide some time for candidate Neal to see if you'd like to expand upon your previous statement about, okay, so we'll move forwards for education then.
I was going to do LEOBOR, my
Okay.
stance real quick.
Okay, yes.
LEOBOR needs to be repealed. We need to stop putting the importance of policing over people. I have an 8-year-old, and it's a shame that he is supposed to be held accountable and be more transparent than our own police force. I think repealing LEOBOR and making sure not only do they need longer training, but they also need mental health providers for themselves. Shooting anyone, I can't imagine myself killing anyone or hurting anyone and going to bed. They also need to take in trauma-informed class on how to handle people with disabilities. But other than that, the fact that our police within office, like my opponent, who does not agree with it, want to continue to protect police and not be held accountable with community review is a very telling thing.
So I think we're going to move on to education next. And mental health was just raised by both of you. Mm-hmm. And I'd like, in talking about education, there's been a noted increase, and it's long-standing and only increased over the past couple of years, of mental health issues and crises in children and teens, which have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Candidate Neal, I'd like to hear from you first about how you would propose to address this issue.
That's a great question, and it's actually really great because I already sit on several committees for my school district that address this. I have 4 children in school, and lockdown was really tough for them. For a lot of children, COVID hit at the worst time, developmentally speaking, when they are seeking those social outlets and trying to find themselves and where they fit. And so that was taken away. What I was actually frustrated about was that when they did get back to school, instead of talking about the fact that some children were with their abusers, some probably went hungry, and many missed their friends, they didn't address how the pandemic affected children Mentally, they just went to, let's get you caught up and back to state testing. And that's why I think, saw a lot of stress and a lot of mental health degrading in our children. As a representative, since I'm already in talks with many school districts and sit on, like I said, several committees, I want to go into the schools and I want to see better climate surveys done. In fact, majority of school districts do not do climate surveys on their students. They do it for the teachers and the parents. Having a climate survey for students where they know they're anonymous and their answers will not come back to get them is one way I want to start providing what schools need to help our students in their mental health.
Thank you. Candidate Coelho.
So mental health to me is a major factor. I know we're talking about children because children are our future and they're important, but when I think mental health, I think about everyone from the children to the most older person that can be 90 or 100 years old walking around us. COVID did not help mental health. It made us all close in, have many issues, stopped from children be able to go to school and see if they're being abused at home, or stopped from seeing spouses if they went to work and the other spouse had abused them. It came to a lot of suicide attempts that I was part of being there helping to try to stop those suicides from happening. Depression got really tight and thick into the community, and my wish is to have a center where actually can be dedicated to mental health, because as much as we talk about mental health, there are people every day out there that I know myself looking for mental health place where they can go to speak to someone, and for different reasons they can find a psychologist, they can find a psychiatrist, they can find a center where they're welcome because they feel like they're not being welcome due to their choice of life or the choice of, or the skin color, how everybody keeps on mentioning. I do understand there is problems with racism in the United States of America, but I don't think racism should be the part where we're going to just dedicate ourselves in mental health to a group and not to the all overall from every age and every race.
Thank you both. For the next question, I'm going to move to a fiscal question. Funding, money, also very important, but sometimes a little bit drier. Mm-hmm. But obviously, it's a decision that representatives play a very large role in. And I would like to hear you both talk a little about your thoughts after Delaware has been a recipient of federal relief funding. Do you believe that this funding has been handled correctly? And what do you agree with about how it was handled, or what would you do differently? And I'll ask candidate Coelho to start.
Okay, so as I run for this office, I've been talking to a lot of people, especially small business and older people. They tell me that for 2 years, Delaware had a surplus over $2.2 billion, and they keep on taxing the small business and elderly people instead of releasing some of their money back to them. They kind of like touches me as a normal person that goes around and thinks, well, the governor said it was only for a year, that we're going to increase all these taxes. But after all, it's like 3 years later, and the realtors have to pay more taxes, elderly people have to pay more taxes, small business has to pay more taxes. When is going to be a relief for those people that they've been there waiting? Because by the governor, we are doing pretty good. So if we're doing pretty good, isn't it time to give a release to some of those people that are in need of their release right now?
Thank you. Candidate Neal, your thoughts on the fiscal approach of the state?
So I'm going to just be straightforward. No, that money did not go out fairly. In our district, one of the biggest complaints that I get from the people I speak to in their communities is actually infrastructure. Our sidewalks are terrible. They are almost unwalkable, and they're definitely inaccessible to someone like me who sometimes uses an electric power chair. I don't want to really just be in the street, because that's not why a street is there. There are sidewalks. On top of that, a lot of the funding, federal relief funding, didn't go to homes that were damaged by Ida. In the last few years, let's see, we have seen tornadoes, we have had hurricanes, and we've had a couple little earthquakes here and there. And that causes damage to infrastructure and to homes. And if you're damaging that, you're ultimately hurting the community. Money tends to go towards corporations still. They don't get taxed like everybody else. Meanwhile, our property taxes are going up, and if we want to have anything fixed in our neighborhood, it tends to be on our own dime. And that is not what federal relief is, should be used or shouldn't be used for. And what I mean by that is relief comes for the people who need the relief. If you're giving it to corporations, is it really called relief anymore?
Well, thank you both. We're going to move into our last question here before final statements. And this question is going to be about racial justice. It's a little bit broad, and I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this. So I'd love to hear about how you propose to combat systemic racism in Delaware, and specifically address, similar to the fiscal question we just discussed, the wealth inequality in the state that is so often divided along racial lines. And I'm going to ask candidate Neal to start.
Yes, that is actually a wonderful question because there's a lot I wish I could say, but we'll be here for 5 years. Being Black in America in general is annoying sometimes. Here in Delaware, let's just put it this way. I'm 40 years old. I have a mother who remembers drinking from colored-only fountains. And so when we talk about racial justice, and I do a lot of work in racial justice, I want to make sure we not only have a seat at the table, but we're in parts of leadership in that table. And the fact that majority of the time Black people are not in any form of leadership, to have those discussions for change, we see the same old cycle. I shouldn't have to be the diversity in any committee as the only Black voice. I don't speak for the entire Black community, and there are a lot of us out there. We need to do better with remembering who built this country. We need to do better with the fact that when it was COVID, our essential workers were mostly Black and brown. They were out there getting sick. They were out there dying at higher rates. As a representative, I will make sure that conversation happens, and I won't care how uncomfortable people get with it.
I apologize. Could you repeat the question
Yes,
again for me?
definitely. So candidate Coelho, if you could just talk about how you would propose to combat systemic racism in Delaware and eliminate the wealth inequality in the state.
So when we talk about systemic racism, I'm a very lucky person to come to the United States of America without even seeing a bit of racism in front of me. So when I came to America and I started to see what racism was, it was very hurtful to me. So the first thing that I believe to stop racism is we need to come together as a community, as a whole. Don't matter if you're brown, white, Asian, whatever nationality you are, you need to come together and have a voice. That's kind of like what I'm trying to do running for representative of District 13. I want to be a voice for those, not just for Black, not just for white, for everyone. Because I think we base too much on the fact that one is Black, one is white, one is brown. But if we go deep inside these people's hearts and you really talk to them and you bring them together, you'll see there is more to be done into each community. If we could just put the difference on the side, that we all the same inside, except the color of our skin is different, we can come together and find ideas and ways of growing the community and growing everything that is wonderful about America, because after all, I believe in that. I believe that America will become a better place than it is at this moment, because no matter which race you are, you love being here and you want to fight together. And I do understand, I have seen how some races are treated. And I don't agree with that. But also, I agree, again, going back to the beginning, that if the state, if the districts finds ways of teaching people how to achieve a better education, a better job, and you're going to achieve more for everyone. And
Thank
we're
you.
going to come together.
Thank you. So as I said, we're now going to transition to final statements. I'm going to start with candidate Coelho, and then we're going to move to candidate Neal. You each have 90 seconds. So candidate Coelho.
Well, I just want to tell everyone that is hearing me out there, I am new running for politics. This is a big dream of mine of being part of something special in the United States of America that can help other Americans. I have a lot to learn, but with your help, and if people have subjects that I'm not aware of them and I need to be educated on them, I am very open to listen and to hear and try to motivate those who don't want to be part of that and come together as a big link, like a big iron chain, like a links, that we come together no matter who you are, and we need to start to love each other and not divide each other and try to suppress one race or another social issue or another social issue. For now, America needs to go back to basics, and that starts in school too. So I'm a person that I believe that in school it should be basic. Your family at home should teach you what they believe in. And then after that, when you become to a certain age, you should be able to move on with your own ideas and know what you want to be, what you want to think. So what that said means to me that if I'm in school being a kid, that I can be free to think of whatever I want to think, and I don't have somebody telling me how to think, I probably become a great person in the future because I was free. And freedom is what America is about, for what I understand. That's why I came here. And I think the freedom begins with your thinking. I don't think nobody should be telling you how you should think, period.
Candidate Coelho, thank you. Candidate Neal, your final statement.
So again, I want to thank the Wilmington Urban League for having me, and for all of y'all out there watching. I know my kids are, so hi, babies. Just thank you for having me here. This is my first time running for office, but it's not my first time being a community organizer and advocate. There's so much we should be doing. And it is because of things like racism and lack of transparency, not only from our police forces, but our own government, the ones who are supposed to represent us, that we keep falling behind. My opponent should have been here today because the people need to see who our representatives are, the ones who've been representing us for 16 years and the ones who are trying to make a difference now. But he's not, and it's me. And so I say, we will do better. Get me in office, and I will make sure things get done. If anyone knows me, I'm persistent, and I'm a Scorpio, so I'm annoying, and I will make sure things get done. But I want to leave everyone watching with this quote, and it's from actually the children's book my daughter Trinity and I wrote that has been banned in several states now. When we are allowed to show all our colors, we make the night sky shine.
Well, I want to thank you, Deshauna, Carlucci.
Thank you.
Thank you both for coming. We are disappointed that Representative John Mitchell was not able to join us today, but thank you both for coming, and thank you, Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League, for hosting these debates. Again, my name's John Reynolds, and thanks for everybody who was able to join today.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for watching today's candidate forums. I hope you received a lot of valuable information, and please share the link again with family, friends, and community members. I'd like to thank Kendall Studios for their support in bringing this debate to you, as well as Flux Creative Consulting for their production. I also like to thank our co-sponsors, the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League and the National Pan-Hellenic Council of New Castle County, Delaware. I want to also give a great thanks to our candidates and moderators for coming today and doing a great job. And I also like to thank our supporting sponsors, the National Coalition of 100 Black Women of Delaware, the 100 Black Men of Delaware, and ACLU Delaware. Thank you all again, and please mark your calendars for Wednesday, October the 19th. We will be bringing you the 2022 general election debates as well for your enjoyment. So again, thank you and have a great rest of your day.